might often hear people ask, what is wrong with people? What is going on in the world? There is so much tragedy going on in the world. There's so much discord. There's so much division, so much distraction. And people are often wondering, where is it all coming from? Why are people not able to get along? Why is there so much divorce? Why is there so much pain and suffering? What I believe is that a number of issues that we deal with in adult society are tied directly to histories of child maltreatment for a substantial portion of the population. There are so many people who have been mistreated in childhood, and it falls under that large umbrella that we refer to as child maltreatment. And child maltreatment includes everything from child physical abuse to child neglect to exploitation of a variety of forms, and even human trafficking. And we're going to get into the different breakdowns of the different forms of child abuse and child neglect in subsequent videos. But basically, what we're looking at overall is unhealed issues in adulthood from child maltreatment. And so we're looking at lasting issues related to mental impairment from child abuse. We're looking at issues such as physical impairment related to earlier histories of child maltreatment. And we're looking at emotional scars for many people that have never healed. They've never been able to heal. They may have never even given any attention to the fact that the emotional scars are there. And this includes things such as hypermasculinity that people are talking about. Some of the things we talk about related to gender wars that are going on throughout society, maladaptive forms of sexuality that people are experiencing, poor life choices that many people make. And there are some groups, some demographic groups that have a very difficult time dealing with the outgrowth of child maltreatment. So they are already having a difficult time just as a social or cultural group. And then when you lump those histories of child maltreatment into their legacy, then it becomes an even bigger issue, and it makes it more difficult for certain social and cultural groups to move forward. And so what we're going to talk about right now as we get started with this is, what are some of the things that people are at higher than average risk for as a result of child maltreatment, so that we can start to think about why it's so important to think about child maltreatment and the implications. And so there are a number of mental, physical, and emotional health issues that are directly or indirectly related to child maltreatment. And one of them, one of those issues is elder abuse. And what that means basically is that when children have been abused or neglected during childhood, they are at higher than average risk for then in turn abusing their older parents. So those elderly parents, those children who were abused before, are at higher than average risk for abusing basically the abusers. Domestic violence is another issue. And this is whether or not we're talking about marital domestic violence or other partner domestic violence or dating relationship violence. All of that is tied to earlier experiences of child abuse, child maltreatment. Also, the being a perpetrator of child abuse in adulthood is tied to having suffered from child maltreatment when the person was a child. Some other issues related to child maltreatment include, as you can imagine, alcohol abuse and drug addiction. Many people who have been abused look for ways to escape the outgrowth of the abuse, the pain of the abuse, the inability to speak out about the abuse. And so drug use and alcohol use and addiction and abuse become sort of coping strategies for many people. Also, a number of people who have suffered from child abuse and it hasn't been resolved have a number of psychological disorders, and prominent among those disorders, as you can imagine, are symptoms related to depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, also known as PTSD, and also some behavioral disorders and emotional callousness related to antisocial personality disorder, conduct disorder, psychopathy, and narcissism. And part of that, I believe, is related to the fact that in many instances of child abuse, the abuse has been ignored or it's been normalized. And so when that abuse has been normalized in childhood, abusing others in adulthood can also be readily normalized. Also, children who've been abused tend to be overrepresented in special education services and juvenile justice systems. When children have suffered child maltreatment, they also tend to be overrepresented in those who are incarcerated and those who are unemployed. And so suffering child maltreatment places a person at higher than average risk for being either unemployed or underemployed. You know, the person who works seasonally, or they work for a few months and then they don't work, or they end up homeless because they're not working. There are also some physical health issues related to child maltreatment that people need to pay attention to. And you can imagine, with the stress that comes from many forms of child maltreatment, physical health impairments are going to logically follow. And some of the really important ones are heart disease being tied to child maltreatment, pulmonary disease, liver disease, even diabetes and obesity. Those are also tied to histories of child maltreatment. And it's interesting because sometimes the demographic groups that are overrepresented in child maltreatment statistics are also overrepresented in health issues related to diabetes, obesity, heart disease, pulmonary disease. Another health issue that tends to come with histories of child maltreatment is teen pregnancy and STDs in adolescence. And of course, death. Early death is also a risk for child maltreatment. And finally, one of the things that people wonder about when we're talking about the gender wars and problems with human interactions, divorce is definitely correlated with histories of child maltreatment. When children experience child maltreatment, their sense of how you're supposed to relate in terms of human interactions, it's impaired. And so they tend to not be as successful in their interactions in human relationships later on. So that would include dating relationships, friendships, their ability to parent, and their ability to maintain a wholesome and healthy marital relationship. So divorce is also high among this particular group. And so we're going to discuss some of the different types of child maltreatment, the different types of abuse, the different types of neglect, some of the statistics related to that, and some of the things that people need to be on the lookout for. And we're going to talk a little bit about intervention and definitely about prevention. So if you have some questions or thoughts or comments that you want us to entertain, you can drop them in the comments section and those will be addressed accordingly. Remember, knowledge is power. Take care and see you soon.